Our grandfather will accompany my sister to the wedding. Our parents abandoned us when we were children, their beliefs leaving no room for love or respect for their own daughters. But now, when their reputation threatens the family, they suddenly decided to remember that we exist. I'm 35 years old. I have a younger brother who is 23 and a sister who is 29. Our parents have always been deeply religious and extremely conservative. When they were raising us, they desperately wanted a son and were deeply disappointed when my sister and I were born. I was their first child, and when they found out they were expecting a girl, they even considered not keeping me. However, due to their religious beliefs, they ultimately decided against it. My grandmother once told me that when I was just 2 years old, my mother sent me to live with her because having me around was making her depressed. My childhood with my grandparents was wonderful. My grandfather patiently taught me how to ride a bike. I still remember the thrill of pedaling on my own for the first time. Those days spent learning to ride created a strong bond between us that lasted for years. My grandmother, on the other hand, introduced me to gardening. She taught me how to care for plants, to watch flowers bloom, and to find joy in creating a small corner of nature. The skills she passed down to me during those gardening sessions still help me to this day. My parents never visited Menno even once until I turned 7. It was only when people started asking why I wasn't living with them that they finally decided to take me back. I protested, begged to stay with my grandparents, but they wouldn't listen. My grandparents gave me warmth, stability, things I never truly got from my own parents. 3 years later, my mother got pregnant again. My parents were ecstatic, convinced that this time they would finally have a son. But when they found out it was another girl, their excitement quickly turned into disappointment. That said, they handled the news better than they had with me. Luckily for my sister, she never had to go through what I did. She was raised by our parents, and while their love for her was conditional, they didn't push her away like they did with me. The difference in how they treated the two of us was glaring. I was expected to help my mother with endless household chores, always proving my worth in their eyes. The list of duties I had to complete was never-ending. Meanwhile, my sister was given far more leniency. She didn't face the same crushing expectations. It seemed like our parents had learned from their mistakes with me and decided to take a different approach with her. The contrast extended to our education as well. When I was in school, I was under immense pressure to excel. My parents had impossibly high expectations, and anything less than perfection was unacceptable. They signed me up for extracurricular activities, forcing me to be the best at everything. My sister, on the other hand, had a much more relaxed experience. While our parents still cared about her education, they didn't push her nearly as hard. She was given the freedom to explore her own interests, and no one breathed down her neck about every little thing. But the most striking difference was in how they celebrated our achievements. Whenever I accomplished something, I would get a nod of approval or a brief acknowledgement. But when my sister achieved even the smallest milestone, it was a full-blown family celebration. It always confused me how could the same parents raise their children so differently. Growing up in an environment of constant criticism was exhausting, especially when I had to watch my sister enjoy a much more carefree childhood. Still, I made a conscious effort not to resent her. I knew none of it was her fault. Despite everything, I supported her and tried to be a good role model. Because of that, we managed to stay close over the years. Then, 6 years later, everything changed. My mother gave birth to my brother. For the first time in their lives, my parents were truly happy. They threw a massive celebration, welcoming their long-awaited son into the world. From the moment he was born, it was clear that he was the center of their universe. He had the most expensive clothes, the best toys, and a bedroom that was far nicer than anything my sister or I ever had. They spared no expense, buying him the highest quality stroller, the best crib, the most luxurious baby gear. But it wasn't just about material things. He received all the love and attention that we never did. My parents were obsessed with capturing every little moment of his life. They took endless photos and recorded every milestone. When my sister and I had similar moments growing up, they barely noticed. Even in the smallest details of daily life, the favoritism was undeniable. They were far more involved in his world than they ever were in ours. They never missed a single doctor's appointment for him, always making sure to be present in every aspect of his life. Meanwhile, for my sister and me, it was our grandparents who played the most significant roles, especially after our brother was born. The favoritism never stopped as he grew older. Unlike us, He wasn't expected to do any household chores, while my sister and I had to handle endless responsibilities. He got a free pass. Birthdays and holidays became extravagant events for him, filled with expensive gifts and grand celebrations. As you might imagine, this made my sister and me feel utterly insignificant. By that point, I had grown used to it. But for my sister, this was her first real taste of what I had gone through as a child. We started spending more and more time at our grandparents' house. We would spend countless days playing in their garden, sitting by the fireplace, listening to their stories. We shared our fears, our dreams, and the struggles we faced at home. No matter what, our grandmother always reassured us that we weren't alone. As a teenager, I was labeled a troublemaker simply because my views didn't align with my parents'. Whenever I tried to explain my perspective, my mother would either burst into tears, claiming I was stressing her out, or she would start yelling, saying she couldn't stand to be around me when I was like this. She'd then proceed to ignore me for hours. When my sister grew older, she started to develop her own identity as well. However, she struggled with mental health issues. For years, our mother refused to acknowledge that she needed help. She insisted my sister was just being dramatic, and whenever my sister had panic attacks or episodes of anxiety, our mother would scold her, saying she was being difficult and making things hard for the family. One night, things at home reached a breaking point. Our parents kept repeating that my sister and I were disappointments, that we should never have been born. It felt like we were drowning in their cruelty, and we just couldn't take it anymore. Feeling lost and broken, my sister and I decided to leave. We packed our things and went straight to our grandparents' house. When our parents found out where we were, they showed up demanding that we come back home. But this time, our grandmother wasn't having it. She tore into them for the way they had treated us. My father, however, brushed it off, claiming that he had provided us with food and a roof over our heads. What more could we possibly want? That was the moment my grandfather, who was normally the calmest, most patient man I knew, truly lost his temper for the first time in my life. He raised his voice and told my father he should be ashamed of himself. Then he made a threat that finally got through to them. He warned my father that if he ever mistreated us again, he would call Child Protective Services. That terrified them, not because they cared about us, but because they were afraid of losing custody of our brother. My grandfather stood his ground, making it clear that we deserved better. I'll never forget the moment he turned to my mother and told her, "You are my daughter, but I would never have treated you the way you treat your own children." For the first time, my mother looked truly ashamed. That night was a turning point. For the first time, someone had stood up for us, and it changed everything. After that, things at home became different. Our parents, especially our father, were noticeably more cautious. They were still cold, still dismissive, but the outright yelling and punishments became less frequent. My brother continued to be their priority, but at least the hostility toward us wasn't as intense. By the time I turned 18, I desperately wanted to go to university. My parents, however, were completely against it. We had a massive fight. My mother insisted that as a woman, my focus should be on marriage and having children. She told me that men don't like women who are too educated. My father backed her, mocking me for wanting an education and claiming it was a waste of time. Hearing my own parents try to sabotage my future just because I was a girl was painful, but I didn't care. I applied to university anyway. I got in with a scholarship meant for high-achieving students, meaning my parents didn't have to pay a dime. They were furious that I had disobeyed them, but by then, I had stopped caring about their approval. I started working part-time while studying, saving up as much money as I could. That phase of my life was transformational. I learned how to handle responsibilities on my own. I got my first real taste of independence. Juggling work, studies, and my personal life wasn't easy, but it made me stronger. Throughout all this, my parents rarely contacted me. They would occasionally call to check in, but our conversations were short and forced. Eventually, I graduated and secured a full-time job. Thanks to the money I had saved from my part-time work, I was able to rent an apartment with roommates. Our relationship with our parents continued to fade, almost disappearing entirely. And honestly, it seemed like they were fine with that. Birthdays and holidays became nothing more than formalities brief, insincere messages exchanged out of obligation. There were moments when life hit me the hardest problems at work. failed relationships, and my first instinct was always to turn to my family. But every time, I stopped myself, knowing they wouldn't care. The thought of stepping back onto the emotional roller coaster I had endured with my parents was unbearable. Eventually, I made a conscious decision to cut them out of my life entirely. The only family member I stayed in touch with was my sister. When it was her turn to go to university, our parents threatened to kick her out if she chose to continue her education. I couldn't let that happen. Without hesitation, I offered her a place to stay with me. She deserved a future free from their restrictions. She moved in with me and enrolled in a local college. I worked tirelessly to support both of us. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to give her the chance to pursue her dreams. During this time, our bond grew even stronger. Despite everything we had endured growing up, I found comfort in knowing that I could create a safe and supportive space for her to thrive. Meanwhile, our brother never faced the struggles we had. Our parents proudly sent him to university without hesitation, even setting aside money to ensure he never had to worry about finances. He was given every opportunity and privilege that had been denied to us. I felt a mix of emotion happiness for him, but also a deep sadness at the stark contrast in how we were treated. Still, my sister and I remained committed to supporting each other, determined to rise above the challenges of our childhood. Throughout it all, our grandparents remained our unwavering source of support. They stayed in touch, visited when they could, and reminded us that we were loved. A few years ago, our beloved grandmother passed away. The moment we heard the news, my sister and I rushed back home to be with our grandfather. That was the first time in years that I saw my parents again. They greeted me with nothing more than a nod, their coldness cutting through me like a knife. I had to fight back tears. I refused to give my mother the satisfaction of scolding me for causing a scene. After our grandmother's passing, my sister and I made it a point to visit our grandfather more often. No matter how busy we were, we always found time for him. We shared meals together, sat on his porch reminiscing about our childhood, and helped him with chores. On weekends, we spent entire days with him, going on walks through the park, making sure he never felt alone. During one of our dinners together, my grandfather surprised me. "I'm proud of you," he said. I froze, caught off guard. He went on, telling me how much he admired the way I looked after my sister. Then, he said something I will never forget. That told me that he was proud to have a granddaughter like me, and that he believed I had the power to change the world. They were just words, but they hit me like a tidal wave. It had been so long since anyone had genuinely acknowledged me. I felt my eyes well up with tears. He reached over, patted my head gently, and smiled. "Your sister is lucky to have you." The pride in his eyes is a memory that will stay with me forever. As for our brother, he kept his distance. Maybe he feared that if he got too close to us, our parents would turn on him, just like they had done to us. Over the years, my sister and I only heard about him through relatives. We learned about all the things our parents had done for him, how they had bought him not just one but several cars, how they covered the down payment on his house so he could move out, how they even paid for a trip to New York for him and his girlfriend because, according to them, he had been working too hard and needed a break. Recently, my sister got engaged to her longtime boyfriend, Robert. They had been together since college, and when he proposed, she was over the moon. Seeing her so happy filled me with immense joy. They are an amazing couple, the kind of love that is evident in every glance, every laugh, every small gesture. The proposal was beautiful, and my sister couldn't wait to share the news. She proudly showed off her engagement ring to anyone who wanted to celebrate with her. She posted pictures of the engagement online, and soon, our relatives started calling with congratulations. Eventually, the news must have reached our parents because, before we knew it, our phones were flooded with calls and messages from them. It was surprising, to say the least. Up until that moment, our parents had shown little interest in our lives. So why now? Why suddenly decide to insert themselves into our happiness after years of keeping their distance? Their messages left us with mixed feeling: shock, confusion, and maybe even a little irritation. Why now? Why did they choose this particular moment to reach out? Caught off guard by their sudden flood of attention, my sister and I exchanged puzzled glances. When she finally answered our mother's call, she was met with an overly enthusiastic voice, gushing about how happy she was for her. My sister, ever polite, thanked her, but we both knew that wasn't the end of it. Then came the questions. Who was Robert? Could they meet him? Knowing our parents and their history, my sister tried to deflect, mentioning how busy she was with wedding preparations. But our father, who was undoubtedly listening in on the conversation, cut in. He insisted that they had the right to meet the man she was going to marry. Their persistence wore her down, and eventually she agreed. But she refused to meet them alone. She told them I would be coming with her. To our surprise, they didn't object. That alone was unexpected. On the day of the meeting, my sister and I were both tense as we headed to our parents' house. The atmosphere was heavy from the moment we arrived. Our parents greeted us with stiff smiles, trying to put on the act of a normal, happy family. My mother smiled at Robert, and we all sat down at the table. It was strange, watching them try so hard to pretend. After all these years, after everything that had happened, they were acting as if nothing was wrong, at least, in front of Robert. But he knew the truth. He had been with my sister since college. He had seen the wounds our parents had left behind. Sensing the awkwardness, Robert tried to break the tension. He talked about his work, his hobbies, his plans for the future. Eventually, the conversation shifted to the wedding. That's when things got interesting. Our parents started dropping subtle hints about how wonderful it would be if our father walked my sister down the aisle, if our mother played a key role in the ceremony. My sister and I exchanged glances, instantly realizing what this was really about. Then, our father outright said it. They needed to be involved in the wedding because it was important to show a united family front to our relatives. My mother nodded in agreement, adding that they didn't want Robert's family to think my sister didn't have parents. That's why their presence in the ceremony was essential. And just like that, everything became crystal clear. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They didn't suddenly develop a sense of love for my sister. No, they were afraid. Afraid of how it would look if she got married without acknowledging them. Afraid of uncomfortable questions. Afraid that their carefully crafted reputation would take a hit. I shook my head, disgusted by how predictable they were. My sister, ever composed, politely thanked them for their offer. But then, she made her decision clear. I already know who's walking me down the aisle, she said. Our father tilted his head, curious. Who? She smiled. Grandpa. The room fell silent. Our parents' expressions shifted from expectation to disbelief, and then to barely contained anger. Our mother was the first to speak, her voice strained. But sweetheart, it's tradition for the father to walk his daughter down the aisle. You can't just break tradition. My sister met her gaze without hesitation. I don't care about tradition, Mom. I care about the people who have actually been there for me. Grandpa was there when you both forgot you had daughters. You're welcome to attend the wedding as guests, just like any other relatives. Our father's face darkened. You can't just push us aside. We're your parents. I couldn't help myself. I let out a sharp laugh. They all turned to look at me, stunned. I leaned back in my chair, meeting my father's glare head on. You gave up the right to call yourselves our parents a long time ago. You treated us like we didn't exist. Now you want to act like a loving family because you're worried about what other people will think? That's pathetic. The truth hit them hard. I saw the flicker of shame cross my mother's face, but just as quickly, it was replaced with anger. My sister didn't waver. You can't suddenly decide to be parents after ignoring us for years, she said firmly. Actions have consequences. You can't rewrite the past just because it's convenient for you now. She made it clear parents would have no special role in her wedding. They could attend, but only as guests. The meeting ended on a bitter, tense note. But my sister never backed down. As we left, I felt a mix of admiration for her strength and disappointment in our parents. Even after everything, they still refused to take responsibility for the damage they had done. Since that meeting, we've been bombarded with calls and messages, not just from our parents, but from other relatives as well. They accused us of being selfish and cruel for not letting our father walk my sister down the aisle. First update. A few hours have passed since I shared this story, and the amount of support we've received has been overwhelming. For those who asked about our grandfatheries, my sister already told him about the engagement, and he was thrilled for her. However, he doesn't yet know that she wants him to walk her down the aisle. We want to tell him in person so we can see his reaction. We're planning to visit him this weekend. As for our parents, they haven't stopped. The angry messages keep coming. My father even went as far as to message Robert on Facebook. In a long-winded rant, he demanded that Robert talk some sense into my sister, claiming that, as the man in the relationship, he should take control of the situation. He also insisted that my sister had no right to ask our grandfather, because tradition dictated that the father should have that role. And then came the ultimatum: if Robert allowed this to happen, our parents wouldn't attend the wedding. Robert's response was simple, direct, and honestly, perfect. My fiancée will do as she pleases, and I fully support her. Whether you attend or not is entirely your decision. I'm certain that my father wasn't expecting such a confident response. I can almost picture his expression, probably a mix of shock and fury. And honestly, that thought makes me smirk. We'll share another update after our visit with Grandpa this weekend. Second update, this weekend, my sister and I went to see Grandpa. We were both excited and couldn't wait to tell him the news. Finally, my sister looked at him, took a deep breath and said, "I want you to walk me down the aisle. You've always been there for us, and I can't imagine anyone else doing it." Tears welled up in his eyes as he pulled my sister into a tight hug. His voice trembled as he said that it would be the greatest honor of his life. Watching him, I couldn't hold back my own tears either. We all embraced, overwhelmed with emotion. He kept thanking my sister, telling her how much it meant to him. We reassured him that this was the least we could do after all the love and support he had given us over the years. Then, we told him about our parents' reaction. We were worried that they might take their anger out on him, but he just chuckled. He assured us that he could handle our mother and that nothing would stop him from walking my sister down that aisle. My sister let out a relieved sigh, and we spent the rest of the evening helping Grandpa around the house. As my sister's wedding day draws closer, we are completely immersed in the preparations. I can't wait for the moment when I get to see her walk down the aisle, knowing that she's about to marry the love of her life. Third update. It's been 3 months since my last update, sorry for the delay, but life has been busy. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was beyond anything my sister had dreamed of. The venue looked stunning, just as we had planned. The room was filled with guests, and there was a joyful energy in the air. However, one absence was impossible to ignore. Your parents never showed up. After we made it clear that their role would be minimal, they chose not to come. And honestly, that was fine with us. We respected their choice. The ceremony itself was magical. My sister, glowing in her wedding dress, stood beside our grandfather. The love and pride in his eyes as he walked her down the aisle was something I'll never forget. It was the right decision, there was no doubt about it. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter, love, and genuine happiness. My sister and Robert exchanged vows, promising each other a lifetime of love and support. The celebration went on late into the night, filled with dancing, heartfelt speeches, and pure joy. After the wedding, life carried on. My sister and I made the final decision to block our parents completely. We no longer wanted them injecting negativity into our lives. We still visit our grandfather regularly, cherishing every moment we have with him. This journey hasn't been easy, but we've learned that the only people who truly matter are the ones who genuinely care about us. I hope this will be my final update. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe, leave a like, and have a great day.